Today's episode is delivered to you in an audiobook format. Our focus today is the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl, a work that not only recounts the author's experiences in Nazi concentration camps, but also offers a foundational theory for how humans survive and even grow during times of unimaginable hardship. Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist, was deported to Auschwitz in 1942 and later to other camps, where he spent 3 years witnessing both the worst cruelty and the most astonishing resilience. In this narration, we'll explore the core lessons of Man's Search for Meaning, dig deeper into how Frankl's observations inform his theory of logotherapy, and share quotes that highlight why purpose and meaning are such vital forces in human life. Frankl opens his account by describing the day-to-day misery and emotional turmoil of life in a concentration camp. Prisoners were stripped of their identities, shaved, assigned numbers, and forced into backbreaking labor in brutal conditions. Food was scarce, sleep was minimal, and roll calls in the bitter cold often lasted hours. Frankl is frank, no pun intended, about the fact that many prisoners descended into despair quickly, while others managed to endure, sometimes with what seemed like inexplicable fortitude. This discrepancy, he realized, did not hinge on physical strength or intelligence. It had something to do with the inner life of a person, particularly whether they could locate a reason to keep living. He writes, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how." It's important to understand that Frankl's vantage point is unique. He was already a psychiatrist before his incarceration, so he observed the suffering around him with a professional's curiosity. Yet he also grappled with these horrors personally, experiencing the same daily indignities, starvation, and labor. He explains that, time and again, individuals who believed there was a crucial task waiting for them, a loved one who needed them, a manuscript they still needed to finish, or a moral or spiritual cause they deeply felt, showed remarkable resilience. On the other hand, those who concluded that life had no further demands on them often lost the will to survive. Frankl believed that suffering itself is not redemptive. There is no inherent virtue in pain. But when suffering is unavoidable, when one cannot escape or alter the conditions, then how a person responds to that suffering can become a site of meaning. He writes, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice." This is a crucial distinction. He never advocates seeking out pain. Instead, he says that if life demands we walk through fire, we can try to answer that demand with courage, love, or responsibility, thereby transforming suffering into something else, a test of character, or an opportunity to remain kind in an unkind world. The first portion of Man's Search for Meaning recounts these harrowing daily details. Prisoners often fought off despair by imagining a future moment, a reunion with family, finishing a creative work, or making a difference in society after liberation. Frankl shares that for him, the thought of reuniting with his wife or reconstructing his lost manuscript kept him alive. Even the faint hope of such a future provided a small flame of energy in the bleakest setting. He notes that the salvation of man is through love and in love, describing how thinking of loved ones could grant a prisoner the fortitude to push forward one more day. Even if the beloved person was gone, the devotion itself continued to bestow meaning. Once liberated, Frankl set about developing logotherapy, which posits that logos, or meaning, is the primary drive in human life. He found that many traditional psychotherapies, like Freudian analysis, emphasize the pursuit of pleasure or the avoidance of pain as core motivators. Others emphasized a will to power. Frankl insisted there was another, deeper drive, the will to meaning. People can endure pain, frustration, or even the threat of annihilation if they feel it is in service of something that matters to them. But when people cannot find meaning, when life feels purposeless, they descend into what Frankl calls an existential vacuum marked by apathy, boredom, and sometimes a turn to destructive behaviors. Frankl uses the phrase, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how," attributing it to Nietzsche. This effectively summarizes the central principle of logotherapy. Find your why, and you will find the strength to face the how. In his post-war years, Frankl counseled numerous patients who suffered from depression, anxiety, or an overarching sense of emptiness. Rather than delve exclusively into childhood traumas or repressed desires, Frankl would often ask them about their sense of purpose. Did they have tasks undone, relationships that beckoned them, creative urges, or moral convictions they wanted to act on? Many found relief the moment they realized they still had reasons to live and to strive, even if those reasons were modest or personal. He also points out that meaning is not one size fits all. Each individual must discover or create meaning for themselves, and that meaning might differ from day to day, or from one life stage to another. He recounts examples. A widow might find meaning in raising her children. A scientist might find it in finishing a crucial research project. A person with a terminal illness might discover it in the example of dignity they set for others, or in reconciling with a estranged family. Frankl never claims that a single universal meaning exists. Instead, he suggests that life constantly asks us questions, and we respond by searching out specific actions or relationships that give us purpose. In the latter half of Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl speaks more philosophically about the nature of humanity. He contends that people always retain what he calls the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances. Even in the camps, with no control over how many hours of labor they had to do, or whether they received any soup that day, or who survived the selections, prisoners did control how they interpreted their predicament, whether they succumbed to bitterness or sought to remain compassionate, whether they gave away part of their ration to a weaker inmate or hoarded it all. This, for Frankl, is the unassailable domain of human sovereignty. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, he writes, the last of the human freedoms: to choose one's attitude. Some might argue that this viewpoint risks ignoring systems of oppression or the responsibility society has in preventing cruelty. Frankl acknowledges the horror of the Holocaust and never absolves perpetrators. Rather, he emphasizes that even while fighting for systemic change, an individual can remain mentally and spiritually free if they cling to a meaning that lies beyond external circumstances. For instance, he saw inmates who refused to break morally, even if it cost them dearly. Such moral resistance, he argues, is an expression of human dignity that not even the camps could eradicate. One potent example Frankl recounts is a fellow prisoner who resisted the urge to turn on others during the hardest times. Whenever extra bread was stolen or a blanket was up for grabs, that prisoner refused to exploit others. Frankl views that choice as a triumph of meaning over despair. By anchoring himself in a moral code that valued kindness, this man reasserted his humanity daily. Although the overall system was barbaric, he chose to bring a small but profound sense of compassion into a place designed to strip away empathy. In doing so, he found a reason to keep living, to remain the person who helps, not harms. Frankl also discusses how, once liberated, many inmates faced a new crisis: the existential shock of freedom. After the intense focus on day-to-day survival, some felt unmoored in normal society. Freed from barbed wire, they no longer had the external structure that gave every small choice a life-or-death resonance. Now they had to rebuild or discover fresh meaning in peacetime. Frankl observes that some ex-prisoners became depressed or angry. Others threw themselves into reuniting with family or seeking new careers. This post-liberation period, he says, highlighted that meaning is not only relevant in crisis, but also in the quiet, day-to-day decisions of normal life. If anything, he warns that in the absence of external adversity, the existential vacuum might yawn even wider if one doesn't actively pursue meaningful goals. Logotherapy's approach to psychological well-being has a few cornerstones. Firstly, it asserts that each person is unique and irreplaceable, meaning each has a unique contribution to make. Secondly, it recognizes we can discover meaning in multiple ways: through creative work, doing something significant; through experiences or loving encounters, caring deeply for someone or something; or through the attitude we adopt toward unavoidable suffering. Thirdly, it reaffirms that humans need purpose more than we need comfort or power. Frankl shares a poignant story. A middle-aged man came to him deeply depressed after losing his wife. He felt life was no longer worth living. Frankl asked him to imagine if he had died first. Would his wife have suffered as he was suffering now? The man admitted she would have. By outliving her, the man spared her that pain. Though it didn't eliminate his grief, it gave him a sense of meaning in his suffering. He bore the sorrow so she did not have to. This, Frankl argues, is one illustration of how reinterpreting a tragedy can impart a new sense of purpose that, while it does not remove the pain, transforms it into something bearable. In a modern context, this logic can apply to people who face chronic illness, unemployment, heartbreak, or any adversity. Frankl's words remind us that while we may not choose our hardships, we do have a say in the story we attach to them. We can regard ourselves as cursed or as individuals in a position to learn or to exhibit resilience. He's not naive. He recognizes that not all suffering is heroic, nor can we conjure meaning out of nothing if we're not honest. But he insists that a human life is inherently oriented toward responding to the call of meaning. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems, he states, implying that every day poses a silent question. Will we respond with purposeful action or sink into despair? Another facet Frankl touches on is the difference between freedom and responsibility. In some ways, the modern sense of freedom can paralyze people if they have no direction. He jokes that the Statue of Liberty on the east coast of the U.S. should be complemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the west coast. Without responsibility, a sense that our freedom is used to serve or accomplish something, a person can flounder. He warns that too much emphasis on personal liberty without a guiding sense of purpose can create anxiety or nihilism. Throughout the book, Frankl uses the term tragic optimism to describe an attitude that remains hopeful in the face of life's tragedies, believing that we can extract meaning from suffering, guilt, and death. He acknowledges that these negative aspects are unavoidable, yet reaffirms that we can harness them for growth. For instance, if we feel guilty about a past mistake, we can atone and transform that remorse into better conduct. If we face death, we can sharpen our appreciation for the fleeting nature of life. Though tragic optimism might seem contradictory, Frankl sees it as a balanced approach, neither ignoring the realities of pain nor succumbing to them. One might question how relevant the lessons of a Holocaust survivor are to daily frustrations, like losing a job or going through a divorce. Frankl addresses that suffering is relative. The fact that someone else's suffering might be greater does not negate your own. However, the principle that meaning can fortify you remains consistent. If you find yourself at a personal low point, identifying that sliver of meaning, a child you need to care for, a skill you want to master, a volunteer cause that ignites your passion, can reorient your mind from despair to purposeful action. What Frankl insists is that no matter how trivial or grand your reason might look to others, if it genuinely matters to you, it has power. He also explores the notion that man is that being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz, but equally, he is that being who entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer or the Shema Yisrael on his lips. This duality underscores that humans are capable of profound evil and profound nobility. Frankl's hope lies in the latter capacity, in the sense that even in the bleakest hour, some maintained compassion and dignity. He never romanticizes the camps. He details the cruelty and the daily humiliations, but points out that these conditions can highlight the best or worst in us, depending on the values we choose to uphold. What does this teach us about daily life in a society that, for many of us, is not at war? The principle might be that once we strip away illusions, each person faces the question, for whose sake, or for what cause, do I endure my daily struggles? It could be to raise healthy, loving children, to fight climate change, to compose music, or to spread kindness in a local community. The form of meaning is individual, but the importance is universal. Without some sense of meaning, we risk an existential vacuum that can manifest as depression, aggression, or addiction. Frankl sees this vacuum as a root cause of many modern ills, not simply a personal failing, but a sign we must find or create significance in a world that doesn't automatically hand it to us. Finally, Frankl reminds us that meaning is often discovered more than invented. We might pay attention to daily life, noticing opportunities to help or create beauty or show compassion. When we cease waiting for life to hand us meaning and start asking, what is life expecting of me in this moment? We shift from passive frustration to active engagement. This perspective means that even a menial job can be done with excellence and love, or a lonely period can become a time for introspection and personal growth. As we draw to a close, it's worth revisiting a central theme. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That quote from Frankl encapsulates his message. We cannot always pick our battles or avoid tragedies, but we can persist in finding a sense of purpose that transcends them. This is the legacy of Man's Search for Meaning, a book that stands as a testament to the human capacity for spiritual survival. Even in the face of systemic evil, the will to meaning can stand firm. That principle resonates across decades and remains a beacon for anyone grappling with adversity today. If there's one takeaway from Frankl's work, it might be that life never ceases to pose new questions, and each of us is responsible for answering them. Meaning, then, is not a distant ideal, but an active, daily choice. A choice that can transform suffering into redemption, emptiness into purpose, and fleeting existence into a life worth living. By seeing that even in the shadow of Auschwitz, meaning and love endured, we can conclude that in the lesser darknesses of modern life, meaning is likewise within our grasp, if only we seek it sincerely. Thank you for joining me for this extended deep dive into Viktor E. Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I hope these expanded reflections on logotherapy, on suffering transformed by purpose, and on the irreducible freedom to choose our attitude inspire you to find or cultivate your own sense of meaning. In a world that often feels chaotic or unjust, Frankl's testament insists that hope lies not in the absence of tragedy, but in our ability to respond to tragedy with compassion, creativity, and moral clarity. Even if we cannot reshape every event, we can reshape ourselves. And in so doing, perhaps we also reshape the future, one purposeful action at a time.